We've been seeing significant escalation of violence in Israel. People have written in suggesting I comment on what peace would look like in Israel. What do I imagine a peace deal looking like? It's been over a year and a half since we last discussed this, so I think it's worth revisiting today. Let's issue a disclaimer, Lewis. I don't believe we are close to real peace negotiations today in Israel, partially because both sides want the other side to agree to preconditions that neither side is keen on doing, although it is possible that negotiations are happening behind closed doors with some of those preconditions that if they don't have to be announced publicly, there's probably more willingness to grant some preconditions. But let's imagine for now that negotiations could really happen in earnest. What would a deal have to look like? Now, some people will hear my take on this, Lewis, and say, oh, it's too pro-Palestinian and it gives too much to terrorist organization Hamas. Others will hear what I'm going to say and say it sounds too pro-Israeli. I'm trying to think about this as pragmatically as possible. What would realistically have to happen? And there are three categories to look at for this deal: the politics, who's in charge, the security situation involving the Gaza blockade, and the borders. What borders would be part of what I see as a pragmatic deal? Lewis, if I may, let's start with politics. And I think you know what priority number one is for me when it comes to the politics of this.
As always, it's going to be Bibi, right?
Absolutely. Netanyahu must go. Whether it's a resignation, whether it's another election that needs to take place to oust Benjamin Netanyahu, even more moderate governments than Netanyahu's have not been able to achieve peace. And the current right-wing government, which is a coalition government of Benjamin Netanyahu involving some extreme religious right-wing elements, they have no credibility at this point to really achieve peace. So Benjamin Netanyahu, he hypothetically could be involved in some kind of productive peace process, but he has been so beholden to the extreme elements of the Israeli Knesset that it would be best for all if Netanyahu goes. On the Palestinian side, Hamas must be replaced by a more secular Palestinian authority immediately. Does Mahmoud Abbas have a role to play there, who's currently overseeing the West Bank? Yeah, I'm open to that. Hamas certainly isn't, though, having assassinated Fatah members in recent years. And Mahmoud Abbas recently gave this just lie-riddled speech at the United Nations. But to the extent that Mahmoud Abbas might be a productive partner, I'm open to him being involved in what must be some kind of secular Palestinian authority that would be in charge. Now, for practical purposes, we should be open to a unity government on paper, which might have some representative elements from Hamas, a demilitarized Hamas that I will get to, merely, Lewis, because there are people who want to see Hamas represented, at least on paper, but the Hamas of today as it stands cannot really be a part of future peace deals.
Yeah, they're just so embedded over there. I mean, how do you really deal with that? And people have been bamboozled into thinking that Hamas has their best interest at heart and that Hamas is protecting them. It's the reality is far from that.
The law of return for Jews to Israel must be maintained if we are going to really make progress on a peace deal. The entire point of Israel is that since Jews are discriminated against and have been kicked out of so many parts of the world over the last several thousand years, this is a place Jews know they can go to, period. As long as that's maintained in the context of a two-state solution, I don't care about calling it a, quote, Jewish state, in spite of that being sort of the original point. That's very important to some. That wouldn't be a requirement for me as long as we maintain a two-state solution sort of paradigm with the law of return. Now, the Palestinian law of return for Palestinians to return to Israel has to also be conceded, but not for 5 million Palestinians. It's just not going to happen. So I think a more reasonable alternative that makes sense and will also be connected to the blockade being released is that anyone who wants to move back to Gaza or the West Bank is free to do so if the eventual Palestinian Authority wants to allow it. It would be their choice. Their sovereignty would dictate that decision. In the past, Ehud Barak, for example, suggested a symbolic number of Palestinians to return to Israel and otherwise significant financial reparations. Practically speaking, Lewis, I think that's going to have to be it.
Yeah, well, it's a great plan you've outlined. I mean, as soon as those in power on both sides want peace, this might be the way to move forward.
Well, let's talk about one of the most controversial elements of this, which is the land arrangement. What would be the borders here? The borders will be more or less the Bill Clinton proposed borders, which are pretty similar to all of the recent ideas. The Palestinian territories will include the West Bank, Gaza, and East Jerusalem. The problem is that the limits of East Jerusalem are currently disputed, but let's assume that they could conceptually be agreed upon and assume that there could be some kind of process worked out there. Jerusalem would become the capital of Israel for international purposes. West Jerusalem, that is. Many people may not know, within Israel, Jerusalem is considered the capital. Internationally, Jerusalem is not considered to be part of Israel, so Tel Aviv is the capital. I think the most pragmatic solution here is that Jerusalem, West Jerusalem, becomes the capital of Israel for international purposes. East Jerusalem becomes part of the Palestinian territories, the caveat being, and this is huge, that the Jewish quarter of the old city remains under Israeli sovereignty. This one point we could talk about for just an hour. It's a very complex situation, but if you go back and research the desecration of the Jewish quarter from 1949 to 1967, when it was not under Israeli control, you will immediately see why the Jewish quarter must remain under Israeli sovereignty. Israel must stop all settlement building immediately, and Israel needs to agree to remove settlements in principle. Now, it's, again, thinking pragmatically, some of those settlements you're not going to remove, Lewis, and you've been to Israel, you know what I'm talking about. I was recently there. When there are settlements that cannot practically be removed, you need to offer meaningful land swaps. Any settlement land needs to be made good on by exchanging other land. Yasser Arafat in the past said that he was conceptually open to meaningful land swaps for the settlements that couldn't reasonably be removed. Lastly, security. What happens with travel and movement in Israel, checkpoints, and the Gaza blockade? Palestinians have to stop all rockets immediately and all tunnel building immediately, and all tunnels must be destroyed, period. Okay? Hamas must demilitarize Gaza as part of a peace agreement. In the 2-year period after the withdrawal of Israel from Gaza, but before the blockade was put in place, thousands of rockets were fired by Hamas. Hamas must demilitarize, Lewis. That is really a non-negotiable part of any potential peace deal.
Of course, that's necessary, but good luck with that.
In exchange, the Gaza blockade would be removed completely as long as no rockets and demilitarization and no tunnel building are held to. The Gaza blockade must be removed if we are going to have a productive peace deal. The key point of all this is whatever agreement is made, all claims must be renounced. This is the end of the conflict. This is very important because once you get both sides to say, this deal includes the renouncing of all past claims, you now have a framework which, if violated in the future, is the violation of an international agreement rather than, well, listen, we violated some kind of intermediate non-binding thing. It's not really that big of a deal. Both sides need to renounce all past claims, and that's what I see, Lewis, as what needs to happen.
Of course, I would bring up the question, what happens when one of these sides violates this agreement? What type of action is taken?
Yeah, well, everything goes back to exactly the way it is now and a horrible status quo, right? I mean, that I think is almost inevitable if such a hypothetical agreement were to be violated.
I think you've outlined some great stuff here, but Dave, there are so many hypotheticals, what ifs, and it's a stretch. We're reaching here.
If you have a disagreement with a particular point from my plan, email me and we'll continue to follow up on this. Let's take a break. Back after this with plenty more.